There is a city in Central Asia that used to be called the City of a Million Books. Baghdad. In the year 1257, it was the intellectual capital of the world. Its libraries held centuries of Persian, Greek, Indian, and Arab knowledge. Its scholars were translating Aristotle, mapping the stars, inventing algebra, writing poetry that people still quote today. The House of Wisdom was one of the greatest institutions of learning in human history. In February of 1258, the Mongols arrived. Within days, the libraries were burned. The books were thrown into the Tigris River. Scholars say the ink ran so thick into the water that it turned black for miles downstream. The canals that had irrigated the farmland around Baghdad for 4,000 years were deliberately destroyed. The Caliph, the supreme leader of the Islamic world, was wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses so that no royal blood would touch the ground. An entire civilization was not just defeated. It was erased. And the man who ordered all of this was the grandson of a man who had been born with nothing. No land. No army. No name that anyone feared. A man who spent part of his childhood as a slave. A man who built the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world. Welcome to Sera History. I'm your host. Episode 10. Today we talk about the Mongols. And I want to warn you. This is not a comfortable story. This is not a story of heroes and villains neatly arranged for your approval. This is a story about what human beings are capable of when fear, genius, loyalty, and absolute ruthlessness are combined in a single people. This is the story of how a handful of nomads from the steppe rewired the entire world in less than a century. To understand the Mongols, you have to understand the steppe. The Eurasian steppe is a vast ocean of grassland stretching from Hungary in the west to Manchuria in the east. No mountains to hide behind. No rivers to build cities on. No forests to farm. Just grass, wind, and sky as far as you can see in every direction. The people who lived here were nomads. They moved with the seasons, following their herds. They lived in portable round tents called jairs, which we sometimes call yurts. They did not build cities. They did not write things down. They did not plant crops. They were, by every metric that settled civilizations used to measure worth, nothing. But they could ride. Mongol children learned to ride before they could walk. By the time a Mongol boy was 3, he was on a horse. By the time he was 5, he was shooting a bow from horseback. The Mongol composite bow, made from layers of horn, wood, and sinew, was the most powerful handheld weapon in the medieval world. A Mongol archer could hit a target accurately at over 200 meters while riding at full gallop. Think about what that means. Every Mongol man was a mobile weapons platform from childhood. And they grew up in conditions so harsh that the ones who survived were hardened beyond what most settled peoples could imagine. Winter on the steppe could kill you. Drought could kill you. Rival tribes could kill you. The Mongols existed in a permanent state of low-level war with each other for centuries. Tribes raiding tribes. Feuds lasting generations. Slaves taken, cattle stolen, women carried off. This was the world Temujin was born into around 1162. His father was a minor clan chief named Yasugii. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatars, at a feast. When Temujin returned home to his clan with the news, the clan abandoned the family. Just rode away. Left a widow and her children with almost nothing in the middle of the steppe. They survived by eating roots, berries, mice, and whatever else they could find. And then, while Temujin was still young, a rival clan captured him and put him in a wooden slave collar. He escaped. That escape, and everything Temujin did after it, tells you who he was. He did not collapse. He did not accept the role of victim that the world had assigned him. He began building alliances. Carefully. Patiently. He found a blood brother, a man named Jamuka, with whom he shared everything. He cultivated relationships with powerful men. He built a reputation for loyalty that was unusual in a world where betrayal was ordinary. He also showed, early on, a talent for something most steppe leaders lacked. Mercy toward enemies who surrendered. Absolute destruction of enemies who resisted. That combination, generosity to those who submitted, annihilation to those who did not, became the template for everything the Mongol Empire would do. By 1206, after decades of war, shifting alliances, dramatic betrayals, and extraordinary campaigns, Temujin had done something no one had ever done before. He had unified all the Mongol and most of the Turkic tribes of the steppe under a single authority. At a great assembly called a Kurultai on the banks of the Onon River, the assembled chiefs gave him a new name: Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He was probably in his 40s. He had started with nothing. He now commanded an army of around 100,000 of the finest cavalry the world had ever seen. And he looked south, at China. The conquest of China took decades and was actually completed by his successors. But Genghis began it. He attacked the Jin dynasty of northern China from 1211 onward, using tactics that shocked settled armies entirely. The Mongols had no use for long sieges in their original form. They were horsemen. They wanted to move fast. But cities had walls. So they adapted. They found engineers. Chinese engineers first, then Persian, then anyone who could build siege weapons. They absorbed the technology of every people they conquered and used it against the next people they encountered. Catapults, battering rams, flaming projectiles, biological warfare, reportedly catapulting plague-ridden corpses over city walls. They also pioneered psychological warfare on a scale that was almost modern. Before attacking a city, they would send messengers offering terms. Submit now, and you will be spared, your merchants protected, your religion respected, your leaders kept in place. Resist, and every living thing in your city will be killed. And they kept their word. Both times. Cities that surrendered were often treated quite well. The Mongols were, surprisingly to most people, genuinely tolerant of religion. Genghis Khan himself seems to have been spiritually curious, meeting with Taoist monks, Muslim scholars, and Christian priests. He never forced conversion. He taxed religious institutions lightly or not at all. In a medieval world of constant religious war, the Mongol Empire was remarkably pluralistic, but cities that resisted. Those are the names that appear in the historical record like wounds. Zhongdu, the Jin capital, was besieged, fell, and burned so completely that travelers reported smelling the charred remains from miles away. The fields outside the city were white with human bones for years afterward. Samarkand, one of the greatest cities on the Silk Road, a city of hundreds of thousands. It surrendered but then revolted. The Mongols returned and killed, by various historical estimates, somewhere between 200,000 and 700,000 people. Nishapur, a city of over 1 million in what is now Iran. The daughter of a Mongol general had been killed during its siege. The order came down. Every living thing in the city was to die. Even the cats and dogs. The city was leveled so completely that when a traveler visited decades later, he could not find where it had stood. These numbers are almost impossible to absorb. Some historians believe the Mongol conquests killed somewhere between 30 and 40 million people. By some estimates, the population of Iran did not recover to pre-Mongol levels for 600 years. The population of China may have dropped by 30%. Genghis Khan died in 1227, probably from injuries sustained in a fall from his horse during a campaign against the Tangut people. He asked to be buried in secret, with no marker. His grave has never been found. He was followed by his son Ogdi, who continued the expansion westward and into southern China. Under Ogdi and then under Genghis's grandson Batu, the Mongols turned toward Europe. In 1241, Mongol armies invaded Poland and Hungary simultaneously. Two separate armies, hundreds of miles apart, coordinating their movements with a precision that military historians still analyze in awe. At the Battle of Legnica in Poland, a combined force of Polish knights and Teutonic knights was destroyed. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, the Hungarian king barely escaped with his life as his entire army was annihilated. The Mongols were at the Adriatic Sea. They were looking at Vienna. And then they stopped. News arrived that Ogdi Khan had died back in Mongolia. Mongol law required all senior leaders to return for the Kurultai to choose the next great Khan. Batu turned his armies around. Europe never knew how close it came. The Mongol armies that had just destroyed the finest knights of Poland and Hungary were not at the limit of their power. They were, by most accounts, nowhere near it. Western Europe survived the Mongol conquests not because of its military strength. It survived because of a funeral in Mongolia. The Mongol Empire at its height was staggering in scale. from the Pacific coast of China to the borders of Poland, from Siberia in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. It covered roughly 24 million square kilometers, 1/4 of the Earth's total land area. And for a period in the mid-13th century, it held perhaps a third of the world's population under a single authority. Nothing like it had ever existed. Nothing like it has existed since. And here is what almost no one talks about. Within that empire, something remarkable happened. The Mongols created what historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For roughly a century, from about 1250 to 1350, the Silk Road trade routes were safer than they had been in centuries. Merchants could travel from China to Europe with a Mongol passport, a tablet of gold or silver called a pesa, and receive food, horses, and protection at way stations across the entire route. Marco Polo made his famous journey during this period. He could not have done it otherwise. Ideas moved with the merchants. Chinese papermaking and printing technology reached the Islamic world and then Europe. Gunpowder, already known in China, spread westward. Medical knowledge, astronomical data, agricultural techniques, all flowing along the same routes that silk and spices had always traveled, but now faster and more freely than ever before. The bubonic plague also traveled those routes. The Black Death that we discussed last episode killed perhaps a third of Europe's population. It arrived in Europe via Mongol-controlled trade networks. The Mongols connected the world. And in connecting it, they also allowed disease to move at a speed it never had before. History is rarely simple. After Genghis, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons into 4 major khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China, ruled by Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, who became the emperor of China and was visited by Marco Polo. The Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. And the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe. Kublai Khan is one of the most fascinating figures in this story. He was raised in China, educated in Chinese classics, and became, in many ways, more Chinese emperor than Mongol Khan. He unified China, extended the Grand Canal, built roads, established a famine relief system, promoted arts and trade. Marco Polo, who served at his court for 17 years, wrote about a civilization of almost unimaginable sophistication. Kublai also failed. He attempted to invade Japan twice, in 1274 and 1281. Both times, his fleets were destroyed by massive storms. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, divine wind. The belief that their gods had protected them from the Mongols would echo through Japanese culture for centuries. He attempted to invade Vietnam and Java. Both times, the jungle terrain and guerrilla resistance defeated what had conquered the open steppes and the Great Plains of China. The Mongols, it turned out, were not invincible. They were a product of a specific environment and a specific style of war. Take them out of that environment, put them in jungles or on oceans, and they struggled. In 1260, something else happened that changed the story permanently. At the Battle of Ain Jalut in what is now northern Israel, a Mongol army was defeated by the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. It was the first significant Mongol military defeat in open battle in over 50 years. The Mamluks were themselves a remarkable force, a military caste of former slaves who had seized power in Egypt and built one of the most formidable armies in the Islamic world. Their general, Baybars, had studied Mongol tactics and devised a response. He refused to be drawn into the kind of sweeping cavalry engagement where the Mongols excelled. He used the terrain, feigned retreats to draw Mongol cavalry into ambushes, and hit them with everything at once when they were committed. The Mongols lost. They retreated. They never successfully invaded Egypt. Ain Jalut matters not just because the Mongols lost, but because of what it meant psychologically. The idea that the Mongols could not be stopped had done half their work for them. Cities surrendered without fighting because they believed resistance was useless. The defeat at Ain Jalut broke that spell. The Mongol Khanates, disconnected from each other, surrounded by peoples they had conquered, slowly changed. They converted to the religions of the people they ruled. The Golden Horde became Muslim. The Ilkhanate became Muslim. The Yuan dynasty adopted Buddhism and Chinese customs. Within 2 or 3 generations, the conquerors were being absorbed by the conquered. This is the great paradox of the Mongol Empire. They were too successful. They conquered so much, so fast, that they never had enough Mongols to hold it all. They had to rely on the people they had defeated to administer, to farm, to tax, to build. And in relying on them, they became them. The Yuan dynasty in China collapsed in 1368, overthrown by the native Chinese Ming dynasty. The Golden Horde fragmented and was slowly dismantled over the following century. The Ilkhanate dissolved into successor states. The great unified empire that Genghis Khan had built lasted, in its complete form, for less than 50 years after his death. But its echoes lasted centuries. Russia was under Mongol domination, what the Russians call the Tatar yoke, for over 200 years, from 1240 to roughly 1480. Historians argue endlessly about what this did to Russian civilization. Some say it stunted democratic development, that the centralized, autocratic model of rule that characterized Russia for centuries afterward was partly a Mongol inheritance. Others say Russia would have developed that way regardless. The Ottoman Empire, which would eventually conquer Constantinople and rule the Middle East for centuries, rose partly in the power vacuum left by the Mongol destruction of older Muslim powers. The Timurid Empire, founded by Timur, who claimed Mongol descent and deliberately recreated Mongol methods of terror, arose from the same chaos. The Mongol Empire in India, founded in 1526, was literally named for the Mongols. Mogul is a Persian word for Mongol. Its founder, Babur, was a direct descendant of Timur on one side and Genghis Khan on the other. Genghis Khan's genetic legacy is literal. Studies have identified a specific Y chromosome lineage that appears in roughly 8% of men across a wide swath of Asia. 16 million men alive today likely descend directly from Genghis Khan in the male line. No other individual in recorded history has that kind of genetic footprint. So what do we make of all this? The Mongols present a problem for the way we usually tell history. They are simultaneously the greatest destroyers and one of the greatest connectors in human history. They killed tens of millions of people. They also created the conditions for an explosion of trade, communication, and cultural exchange that arguably laid the groundwork for the Renaissance in Europe. The Black Death, which traveled their trade routes and killed a third of Europe, also arguably broke the feudal system and accelerated the economic and social changes that produced the modern world. Cause and catastrophe. Destruction and creation. Both true at the same time. This is what makes the Mongols so difficult to reduce to a simple verdict. We want history to deliver a clear moral. The bad guys lost. The good guys won. Justice prevailed. The Mongols do not give us that. They give us something more uncomfortable. A lesson that power does not care about our moral categories. That the people who change the world most dramatically are often not the people we would have chosen. That civilization is fragile, and the things we build with centuries of effort can be reduced to ash in days. But also, that even the most catastrophic disruption can create space for something new. That the routes the Mongols opened carried not just silk and plague but ideas, mathematics, science, and eventually the knowledge that would remake the world again. And perhaps the deepest lesson, that the systems and empires we build are only ever as strong as the question at their heart. What are we for? What holds us together? The Mongols held together as long as they had a mission. Conquer. Expand. Unite the world under the sky god Tungri. When the mission ended, when there was nowhere left to go, when the sons and grandsons of conquerors became comfortable administrators of settled empires, the thread that bound them snapped. They became what they had defeated. And eventually they were swept away by the next wave. That is the cycle. Not just Mongol history. All history. All of us. Empires rise from hunger and fall from comfort. Ideas spread when they are dangerous and die when they become official. The steppe produces conquerors when it is desperate and grass when it is not. The horse archers are gone from the plains of Mongolia. But the world they made, by destroying and connecting, by burning and trading, by killing and carrying ideas across the greatest empire in history, that world is still here. You are living in it right now. This has been Sera History. Episode 10. If this story shook something loose in you, if it made you see that the line between civilization and catastrophe is thinner than we like to believe, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We will be back. There are more stories. There are always more stories. History is not behind us. It is us.